Hi, this is Sara Marks, the author of the 21st Century Austen series and the author whose YouTube channel you're watching. I'm going to do a series of videos from a list of questions that friends have given me over the years to talk about why I write, what I read, why I do things the way I do as a writer. So I have about 15 of these, and I think that's about 15 weeks of content. So let's start with the big question. Why do I write? I'm one of those media consumers who has their own ideas. Sometimes it's, I don't like the way a character was handled. Other times it's, you left this plot hole open and I'm going to fill it with my own story. Or there's a character who's simply poorly defined and thus there's room for me to create my own story. A really good example of almost all three is Cedric Diggory from the Harry Potter series. Now, if you've not read the series, what's really important to know is that midway, you aren't introduced to Cedric Diggory until the fourth of the 7 books. And then he is promptly killed by the end of that book. But he is the perfect student at the school. He is the Hufflepuff, the seemingly innocent good guys, but he is a perfect representation of all the characteristics of all these houses amongst the school. But he is also purely and perfectly undefined. Because he's going to die at the end of the book, you are already going to fall in love with him enough to feel the pain of his death, which is really what Rowling wants. She wants you to feel the pain of his death. And I felt the pain of his death. If you've spent any time on my platforms and newsletters or online, you know my dog is named for him, Cedric Diggory. So I love this character. And because he was so poorly defined, with valid reason, I was able to fill in the gaps of his life in my brain, telling myself the story. And then when she killed him, I was irritated that she killed him because I had created a whole world for him. And he died young. And I didn't like that. And then there were other little plot holes. Not problematic ones to the story. Just little things left unresolved in the Harry Potter series. And I wanted to fill them in myself. With ideas I had. With knowledge I had. So I started writing a little Harry Potter fan fiction. And it's taken on a life of its own. But that's not what you're reading. That's the fantasy content. That's a different name. The Rom Com series that you're reading is similarly with Jane Austen books. I often sit and think about what would this character do in this day and age. One of my favorite Austen adaptations is not an Austen work, it's Lost in Austen, where a modern woman gets sent back to the Regency era and Elizabeth Bennet is sent to the modern era. Now, that was the early 2000s, so Lizzie Bennet had a grand time. She actually quite enjoyed and did not wish to return to the Regency era. But I started putting together these little stories in my head, playing them out over and over. Who would Mr. Darcy be? Who would Elizabeth Bennet be? Who would any of the Bennet sisters be? What if they were in this situation? What if they were in that situation? The problem for me is that once those ideas get in my head, they're stuck there. There's nothing I can do. Except for one thing. I can write them down. There's an adage that you can't edit a blank page. I routinely edit a blank page because I am constantly replaying these scenes over and over in my head. And each of the books you've read by me has been in my head on repeat for months, if not years. Especially the early books. Those were stuck in my head for years before I finally got to write them down. So I write them down to share them. Because if I don't, I'm going to think of them forever and no new thought and no new obsession can get in there. The other reason I write is because I find romance books frustrating. I have a lot of tropes I don't care for. Primarily, I hate tropes that revolve around the sin of aging, the sin of being single, and the sin of being child-free. And I think modern women don't deserve to be beaten down because they have chosen something else. Or I just got tired of being in characters' heads where all they thought about was getting married and having babies and how fat they were, and thus that was why they were not getting married and having babies. These are not things that concerned me in this world. I wanted to read women like me, women who were ambitious, who had goals beyond their potential motherhood. And it's not to say there's anything wrong with wanting to be a mother. It's simply not what I wanted. And I knew there were other women like that, and that being a single child-free woman, or a married child-free woman, or to have children later in life, needed to be acknowledged, that many women don't hear the ticking of their biological time clock. I am one of them. It broke, and I was more than happy to enjoy that. So I started writing so that other women like me would have those characters to read, to know that other women were thinking like this, were wondering like this. And if you read the Austen series, you'll know each of those women has her own journey. Emma and Frederick get married and have kids. Elizabeth and Will eventually get married and eventually have a kid, but it's not a pressing thing. Amelia, we don't get to. We never get that far in her story, nor with Katie in Love from Northanger Park's Katie. Carrie Woodhouse does not want to marry Zach or have kids at all. Her plan is that the twins, her brother's children, will inherit everything. She is working towards that. And that's going to be true for other characters, especially the longer I keep writing and the more series I take on. We're going to see non-traditional life choices, and those will include no marriage and no children. And not a single one of my characters is going to think of herself as fat and that equaling unattractive. I simply won't do it. As a heavy woman, I always felt like shit reading about these skinny women thinking of themselves as fat. I know that's what society teaches us to think about ourselves. I just didn't want to read it in books. So these are the reasons that I write the books I write. I want to get the story out of my head so that I can move on to other stories to get obsessed with. And I want to read the women like me. So I write the women like me. I hope if this was your question, you feel like the answer is sufficient. If not, ask something else and I'll answer that one too. But until then, I hope you have a great week and enjoy the books.